This is Frontline on Air. Major stories on the go.
DMK at 75. How Karunanidhi's vision collides with caste realities in modern Dravidian politics. Rise of caste-based political outfits and intensifying confrontation politics pose challenges to the DMK's social justice-driven governance model. K.A. Manikumar.
Voice by Rakesh Sharma, Timber Media.
The year-long celebration of the birth centenary of the late Kalaignar M. Karunanidhi, former Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam or DMK chief and five-time Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, which concluded a few months ago, has left his party, which also celebrates its 75th anniversary this year, in a jubilant mood. Kalaignar, the moniker, means a scholar of the arts who is known for his scholarship, political acumen and remarkable courage, has left an indelible mark on Tamil Nadu's political landscape. Despite facing three major splits during his leadership, he managed to keep the DMK united until his death. When Karunanidhi passed away, many wondered whether the party, without its towering leader, could maintain unity in the face of internal divisions. Yet, in contrast to the fractured state of its rival, the All India Anna Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam AIA-DMK, which splintered into three factions, the DMK has emerged stronger than ever. Under the leadership of M.K. Stalin, Karunanidhi's son, the party remains a formidable political force now. After breaking away from the Dravida Kazhagam in 1949 on the question of participation in electoral politics, C.N. Annadurai, fondly referred to as Arinyar, scholar Anna, and his ideological heir Karunanidhi pursued their political career through the DMK. As scriptwriters, both Annadurai and Karunanidhi could propagate the party's ideology through Tamil cinema. Both were adept in using aphorisms and asides in public discourses. With their main thrust on Tamil language and culture, they cast a spell on their audiences with their oratorical skill, which went a long way in helping the party emerge as an aggressive political organization that could challenge the well-entrenched Congress party in the 1960s. The Congress's blunders, such as Rajaji's unpopular educational scheme, which the DMK dubbed Kulakalvi Tittam or Hereditary Education Scheme, the political repression the government unleashed on DMK cadres when they agitated against the rising price of food grains in the state, and the disastrous announcement of Hindi as the official language in 1965, strongly boosted the political prospects of the DMK. But a critical analysis shows that these factors alone did not catapult the DMK to power. The vision of social justice and welfare. At a time when the state was reeling under a severe shortage of food grains, the election manifesto drafted by Annadurai targeted a wider section of people. Correctly sensing that their real competitor was the CPI after its striking performance in the 1952 election, both Annadurai and Karunanidhi expanded the DMK's manifesto to include land ceiling and nationalization of transport services, which were then part of the CPI's program. Speaking in the Assembly on the budget in 1962, Karunanidhi presented a powerful case for the takeover of private bus companies. One of his first administrative actions on assuming office as Chief Minister was to give effect to it in 1972. With the premature passing of Anna in 1969, Karunanidhi, who enjoyed popular support among cadres, managed to steer clear of all inner-party wrangles and successfully took over the party. His commitment to create a welfare-oriented government fetched rich political dividends. He introduced subsidized power for farmers and strengthened the public distribution system by making available domestic essentials such as rice, kerosene and sugar at subsidized rates in government-run fair-price shops. His expanded welfare schemes included housing for slum dwellers, pattas and free land to landless Dalits, and access to higher studies for the marginalized and poor sections of the society. A series of progressive social laws introduced by his government fulfilled many of the aspirations championed by E.V.R. Periyar. These reforms granted equal property rights to women, recognized intercaste marriages, institutionalized self-respect marriages, and appointed scheduled castes or SCs as temple priests. Following the landmark Supreme Court judgment in the Champagam Dorairajan case, 1951, which upheld the state's authority to implement reservation policies in education and government jobs, Karunanidhi a staunch advocate of social justice, acted decisively. His government set reservation quotas based on the recommendations of the A.N. Satyanathan Commission: 31% for backward classes, BCs, and 18% for SCs and scheduled tribes, STs. In response to a 1990 Madras High Court judgment, Karunanidhi introduced an exclusive 1% reservation for STs. His commitment to social justice also played a pivotal role in extending significant benefits to marginalized communities such as the Vanniyars and the Mukkulaturs. After widespread agitations led by Dr. Ramadas of the Pattali Makkal Katchi (PMK), his government granted a 20% reservation for most backward classes, MBCs, and denotified communities, DNCs. The fierce electoral rivalry between the DMK and its breakaway rival, the AIA-DMK, eventually resulted in 69% caste-based reservation for other backward classes in Tamil Nadu. Thanks to Karunanidhi's vision, Muslims and Arundhatiyars were granted inner reservation of 3.5% and 3% respectively, Muslims within BC and Arundhatiyars within SC. Landlordism in Tamil Nadu. But how have the Dravidian parties fared in addressing the socio-economic problems of people who are at the bottom of society? Dravidian ideologues claim that landlordism declined in Tamil Nadu because of Periyar's Dravida Kazhagam and land tenure measures adopted by the DMK government under Karunanidhi, downplaying the decisive role of the Congress and the CPI. In fact, the idea of tenancy reform was first articulated in the context of the agrarian crisis of the 1930s, caused by the worldwide economic depression. With a 50% fall in the price of agricultural produce, rich peasants and landlords were fighting for tax remissions in the Legislative Council, while tenants and landless labourers were left with no choice but to take to the streets to press their demands. With increasing instances of default, the zamindars resorted to force to collect rent. The tenants resisted, and there were widespread incidents of zameen officials getting assaulted in several zameens of Thanjavur, Ramanathapuram, Tiruchirappalli and Tirunelveli districts as they engaged in rent collection. In view of the colonial government's indifference to the tenants' demands for fair rent and security of tenure, some congressmen who led the tenant struggles in zameen tracts demanded abolition of the zamindari system, which was eventually accomplished after independence. During this period of depression, agricultural labourers struck work across the districts. In several villages, the mirasidars complained that they were not able to extract work from pannayals, that is, bonded labourers. For instance, in Palayam village, Nanneelam Taluk, in Thanjavur district, both tenants and agricultural labourers rose in rebellion in 1939 against the mirasidar who hired hoodlums to intimidate them. A police sub-inspector, at the insistence of the mirasidar, went to the Dalit quarters along with 2 constables to put the residents under detention. In Ramanathapuram district, the conflict between 2 agrarian castes of Tevars, who were tenants, and Devendra Kula Vellalars, who were landless labourers, led to riots. B. Srinivasa Rao and Manali Kandasamy of the Communist Party launched the Vivasaya Thorilalar Sangam, Agricultural Labourers Association, in Thanjavur in 1939. In Thanjavur district, there were traditions of joint struggle by sharecroppers and agricultural labourers in the 1930s. As attested by the sociologist Saraswati Menon, this tradition continued even in the 1940s with the setting up of All India Kisan Sabha branches in several taluks from 1943. Menon observed that the abysmal living conditions of innumerable sharecroppers were similar to the wretched plight of the Pannayals. Struggles of the Dalits as a land labouring class. The peasant movement became militant in the face of post-war inflation and the attendant erosion in real wages and increase in rents. Alarmed by the developments taking place in the context of the Telangana peasant struggle since 1946, the Congress government outlawed the CPI and its Kisan Sabhas, Vivasiyagal Sangams. In Thanjavur, the peasant leaders were arrested and their offices sealed. Kuppusamy, a member of the CPI of Kalappal, was sentenced to imprisonment. Following his death in jail, there were violent incidents in many parts of East Thanjavur. The police had to resort to firing in April 1948 to quell the violence. In the process, one of the union leaders, Natesan, was killed. The prolonged struggles of cultivating tenants and agricultural labourers, however, led to the signing of the historic Mayavaram Agreement on October 28, 1948, the settlement of which was satisfactory to all concerned, as cited in K.C. Alexander's book Agricultural Labour Unions. This settlement, according to the anthropologist Kathleen Goff, paved the way for the Tanjavur Tenants and Pannayals Ordinance of 1952 that set the rents of the cultivating tenant at 3/5 of the crop and increased agricultural wages by about 2/3. Goff did a field study in Tanjavur villages, Kumbapettai and Kiripur, first in 1951 to 53 and later in 1976. What Dalits as a land labouring class gained under the communist leadership is detailed by Goff as follows. The Vivasaya Thorilalar Sangam had 200 members at the time of its inception, 1939. It increased to 45,000 in 1973. In 1951, almost all Dalit children worked as agricultural child labourers. However, when Goff returned, she observed a significant decline in child labour and an increase in the number of Dalit children enrolled in school in every village. The wages prevalent in the early 1970s were considered to be the highest in East Tanjavur, and hence, when the Tamil Nadu government appointed a committee for the revision of minimum wages for agricultural workers, it excluded the region from the committee's purview. In 1952, Pannayals in many villages could be beaten for alleged defiance and misdemeanor. In 1976, it had become rare to see a master beating his Pannayal. In 1952, recalcitrant Pannayals were forced to drink a solution of cow dung. By 1976, this odious practice had disappeared. There was gradual disappearance of the Pannai Adimai system. Since 1952, the public amenities available to Dalit labourers had improved. Most areas had well-built roads, electric streetlights, and newly dug wells instead of pools for drinking water. The caste restrictions imposed on Dalit labourers had considerably reduced. They could walk freely in the streets and wear shirts and ankle-length clothing instead of just a knee-length garment earlier. The struggles of Dalits spearheaded by the communist parties helped end social oppression. Goff attributed the ceiling imposed on land ownership at 30 standard acres in 1961 and 15 standard acres in 1972 to the heroic struggles and sacrifices of the Dalit land labourers. But the government's poor implementation of tenancy legislation and land ceiling laws in 1961 and 1972 enabled landlords to circumvent them through large-scale Benami transactions in connivance with the bureaucracy. Even the meagre surplus land made available for redistribution to the landless agricultural labourers was not suitable for cultivation. The absentee landlords evaded the legislation by selling land to their tenants at a throwaway price. The beneficiaries of land reforms were, therefore, the tenants, Kallars in Tanjavur, Mukkulador in South Tamil Nadu, and Vanniyars in North Tamil Nadu. Many political analysts are of the view that the domination of Dravidian parties in electoral politics has become possible only due to their alliance with these powerful caste groups, to the detriment of the interests of Dalits. The numerical preponderance of Brahmins in land ownership is indisputable, but there was also a sizable number of landlords belonging to the Mudaliyar, Moopanar, Vellalar, Naidu, Udayar and Kallar communities. Before the enforcement of the Land Ceiling Act, in the central part of the district where landlordism was dominant, Brahmin landlords possessed between 1,200 to 2,000 acres, while non-Brahmin landlords had land to the extent of 15,000 acres. When the sociologist André Bété visited Shripuram in Tanjavur district in 1962, a village chosen for his study, he found that temples, gram panchayats and cooperative societies once controlled by Brahmins were under the control of the non-Brahmin landed gentry. In Shripuram, Bété noticed a Kallar leader functioning as president of the local gram panchayat. Bété wrote that although Vellalars and Kallars were in equal numbers, the latter dominated the village politics in view of their numerical strength in the adjoining villages. In 1976, even after land reforms had been executed in 2 spells, Goff found many families owning 100 or more acres of land. She also came across 3 family estates with more than 3,000 acres and several more with about 500 acres. These landlords, through Benami transactions, had registered lands in the name of their tenants or labourers. caste and confrontation politics. Whether it was Congress rule or the rule of the Dravidian parties, the struggles, both on class or caste lines, continued to be treated as a law and order problem. Like the AIA-DMK in 1995, the DMK was discomfited by the outbreak of caste violence in South Tamil Nadu in 1997. Karunanidhi, treating it as a law and order issue, established the Southern Zone Inspector General Office in Madurai. Sociologists point out that wherever people live under unjust social conditions and are therefore deprived of the chance to realize their full potential, structural violence is inevitable. The Justice Party, the precursor of the Dravidian movement, proclaimed itself as a non-Brahmin party. Non-Brahmin is not a homogeneous group. In the context of Tamil Nadu, those in the forefront of Justicite politics were elites drawn from communities such as Mudaliyars, Chettiyars and Vellalars, who patently belonged to the upper strata of the non-Brahmin group. The party hardly represented larger social groups such as the Vanniyars, Nadars and Mukkuladors or Tevars. So the communal geos of 1921 and 1922, over which the Dravidian parties take pride today, were helpful only to the elites of the minority non-Brahmin strata. In 1969, nearly after 4.5 decades of the introduction of the reservation policy, the A.N. Satyanathan Commission, set up by the Karunanidhi government, found, quote, nearly 70% of the population of the cultivating castes, that is Padayachi, Kallar and Maravar, more than half the Kaikola population and smaller castes, including barbers and washermen, living in conditions of abject squalor and under conditions hardly distinguishable from those prevailing amongst the scheduled castes before independence. Unquote. After another 20 years, the Amba Shankar Commission, in its report, 1983, pointed out that of the total number of BC students admitted to professional courses, more than 3/4 were from a small number of BCs, 34 out of 222. In the wake of the 1-year agitation, spearheaded by the PMK of Dr. Ramadas, Karunanidhi introduced 20% reservation for MBC DNC. Vanniyars, as reported in The Hindu recently, have since cornered a major part of the seats in the MBBS course. Whether they belong to BC or SC, a large number of caste subgroups still feel left out, as the state's reservation policy has resulted in an uneven distribution of the originally intended benefits. Dr. Ramadas's success with caste-based mobilization soon prompted all main caste groups to have political outfits. The New Justice Party, Mudaliyar, the Konganadu Makkal Katchi, Gaundar, the Pudiya Makkal Tamil Desam Katchi, Yadavas, and the Samaduva Makkal Katchi, Nadar, are notable examples. Failed by the mainstream political parties, Dalit people have rallied behind their caste leaders under the banner of parties such as the Dalit Pantha Party, the Tamilaga Makkal Munnetra Kazhagam, Pudiya Tamilagam, and the Adi Tamilar Peravai. With lower representation for socially deprived communities in seats of power and the denial of their rightful claim to equal treatment in state patronage, Dalit parties find themselves increasingly uncomfortable with their alliance partners. Their feelings of despair are further fueled by the continuing caste atrocities on Dalits by intermediate castes. Intercaste animosities rising out of institutional power sharing have intensified confrontation politics in Tamil Nadu, which may soon drive the state into a crisis of governability. It remains to be seen whether the government under Stalin can address these structural challenges, especially considering that the state aspires to be a model of social justice governance.
K.A. Manikumar is a retired professor of history at Manomaniyam Sundarnar University, Tirunelveli.
This is Frontline on Air. Major stories on the go.